Sure.
Okay. Well, hi, everybody. I am very excited to be here and excited to be doing this and part of this community. My name is Sarah Otazo. Online, I'm Sarah Otazo-Maxwell. I remarried in my living room during the pandemic uh, and then had a little celebration following that. But professionally, I just use Otazo. So I am a functional nutritional therapist, which differs from somebody like a registered dietitian or a regular nutritionist. So, registered dietitian might be the person who figures out what goes in the feeding tube for the patient in the hospital, or what can the person who was told that they should eat a low salt diet, what kind of meal plan can they have? Functional nutrition takes a holistic view of the human body and says, what, by looking at a series of things, so mostly it's symptoms and challenges and unwanted issues that you deal with every day. It's blood work. It could be some other kind of test, like a urine test or even hair tissue, because you can biopsy the hair and look at what's going on with the mineral content in the hair. And it's a great window into what's going on in the tissues in our body. So we can look at all these different things and then figure out what organs and what organ systems are having the toughest time. Like, so for instance, if somebody walks into my office with diabetes, I can't say, I'm going to cure your diabetes, but the tools I have at my disposal are a change in diet, which can be super confronting for people. And so we just make slow changes and kind of find that way of making enough progress so that it's inspiring to people, but not so slowly that not much is happening and they're not getting anything out of it. So we just move to kind of shift over time. But the biggest thing is nutritional deficiencies. We as a planet are just walking around with all these oddball deficiencies that really didn't exist in human history. And the reason is we have access to more food than we need, probably more often than we need. And the effort to process that takes a lot of nutrients. And so we're actually burning through a lot of nutrients that in the past we really didn't. So especially our pancreas, because we're knocking on the door of our pancreas to produce insulin for our blood sugar every time we eat. And that's much more frequent than cave woman Sarah was eating, right? So we've kind of gotten dysregulated. And when we look at what is this person's nutritional deficiencies, what are the symptoms that are just bugging them, whether it's cognitive or physical or however it is, maybe it's digestive issues, we can really make a plan to say, how do we shift this and what's doable for this person's lifestyle, and what's their capacity for change, and how can we help them along that journey of change. So that's kind of what functional therapy is. I will tell you my personal story. The reason I came to this work was I'm a cancer survivor, 20 years this month. 20 years this month, I was in the middle of my chemotherapy, so done with that. I was widowed by cancer, so I concurrently went through cancer with my spouse at the time. We were only in our late 30s. He had a recurrence after our son was born. He passed away when our son was 3. And shortly after that, that child was diagnosed with autism, which brought me to this work. He's 17 now. But a few years after that a few years after all that went down, I was diagnosed with a couple of autoimmune diseases. So that's a situation where the body's tissue is kind of attacking itself and it just kind of misfires. So autoimmune means kind of like over immune. Your immune system's reacting too much and it's attacking an organ. So if you have Hashimoto's, it could be thyroid issues. If you have rheumatoid arthritis, it could be joint issues. And it could manifest in any organ or body tissue. So I was actually able to put those to bed without going on medication and by just really looking at what are the nutritional deficiencies and what are some of the diet issues that are stressing me out, stressing out my body that need to be shifted. So I couldn't believe more fully in the possibility. And it really does guide me in my work with working with everybody with physical challenges, with mental health challenges, with all of it. So that's the introduction. I don't know if anybody has any questions about that. And I did want to jump into a few things. I had mentioned a couple of topics that I thought would be interesting to jump into, and then maybe we can just go from there. So one of the things we always hear about with autism is, let's talk about gluten-free, right? And so many people have dabbled with gluten-free or been incredibly strict with going gluten-free. And most people say, I tried it and it really didn't do a thing for me, and I'm done. And the challenge is, so gluten is a protein that's in flour, in wheat flour. It's also in barley, which we don't have a lot of. It's also in rye, we also don't have a lot of. And it can be in some oats unless they're specifically produced in a gluten-free facility and protected when they're growing, because there can be a lot of cross-contamination. So when people have a gluten sensitivity, it can actually kind of eat away at the lining of their digestive system. So all those little hairs that are supposed to absorb the nutrients in our small intestine actually get damaged and they don't absorb nutrients. That's more the way people who have celiac is, which is another autoimmune disease. But there's some level of damage when you have a gluten sensitivity. So it, again, can challenge the absorption of nutrients, but it also compromises cognitive function. So it leaks into the bloodstream. It can get into the blood-brain barrier. It can cross that blood-brain barrier and kind of set things on fire. So it can be triggering for people, but sometimes that's not all it is. And so sometimes there are people who need to go fully grain-free, even if they're not eating glutinous grains. So other grains could be gluten-free oats. There are all kinds of them: teff, spelt, millet, amaranth. There are a lot of grains out there, rice. So sometimes when people don't have enough benefit from going gluten-free, they need to go grain-free. Sometimes when people go gluten-free, they're buying 10 or 15 different products that replace the things they were eating, but it's still kind of junk food. Like gluten-free cookies are still cookies. Gluten-free pasta is still processed flour. Gluten-free cereal is still a highly processed product. And I think the challenge is finding the balance, right? So telling somebody to go gluten-free could be beneficial, but I think the bigger issue is, how do we just incorporate more whole foods into the diet? Like the stuff that we just grew without a ton of pesticides, ideally, that we can prepare minimally and ingest. And again, going back to cave woman Sarah, how did she eat? She didn't have grab and go foods at 7-Eleven available, right? She couldn't drive through and get the chicken nuggets at McDonald's. And so keeping that in the back of the head as the conversation, as you make choices, can help inform some of those choices. The challenge is, kind of the double whammy is, a lot of people on the spectrum have some sort of digestive dysfunction. Even if they don't really experience it on a daily basis, they may have something going on. And one of the side effects of that dysfunction is restricted eating, or kind of, people might call it pickiness. I don't call it pickiness. I think it's selectivity. It's the desire for things to be the same. It's the desire for things to not be a surprise, We want it to look the same, smell the same, taste the same, be the same shape always. Temperature can come into play there. And so there can be this kind of challenge of how do you get over the hump, right? How do you get over the hump of broadening the dietary choices when the dysfunction in your digestive system is actually guiding you to make very minimal choices? So we go slowly. Again, we look, instead of saying, we're going to remove these 20 things, we say, here are 10 or 15 things we can try. And we're not going to load them up and throw them at somebody all at once. We're going to go super slowly, and we're just going to make attempts. And one of the things I've learned along the way is it can take up to 15 exposures to a food before it's accepted for children and adults alike. There's also a whole lot of, as we know from all children, will say, I don't like that. But they've never even tried it. They've just heard maybe that their older sibling didn't like it, or they've looked at it and decided it doesn't look great. So working through some of those challenges of, we're really going to give this a try, can be super beneficial. I want to talk for a minute about gluten and dairy, because we hear a lot about the gluten and dairy-free diet. Gluten and dairy each contain a protein that not just individuals on the spectrum, but a lot of people with different types of digestive dysfunction can experience as almost like an opioid. It's so heavily desired and gives you such a rush of dopamine, the feel-good neurotransmitter, that people choose it to the exclusion of everything else, which I think is different from being a picky eater. I think that's like your gut driving the decision of, I've got to have this. And so just recognizing that without any judgment and saying, okay, a lot of people are drawn to specifically gluten and dairy-free products, right? Grilled cheese, goldfish crackers that are cheddar, a bagel with cream cheese, pizza. Like, think of all the instances of bread and cheese, and it just all sounds like comfort food, right? So just looking at it completely objectively and saying, okay, this choice, this desire is coming from, it's not about willpower, it's actually coming from some kind of dysfunction in the gut. And that can really help in terms of shifting. So first thing we do is shift people to see if we can find a tolerable gluten-free bread. And then we work on, okay, instead of doing cow's milk, could we try some different kind of cheese? Would a sheep's milk cheese work? Because sheep's milk tastes a lot like cow's milk, but the protein in it is a little bit different. And so even that change can be beneficial. It can be hard to get some of the ingredients, but we try and be creative. So that's the deal with gluten and dairy. When people talk about, oh, I had so much success going on this gluten-free, dairy-free diet. Well, for some people that might work. For others, it may be not enough. We may need to go further. And for some people, they may try them in succession instead of trying it both at the same time and say that it didn't work, when really there might be a need to eventually eliminate both of them to get the benefit of having them out of the diet or reduced in the diet. So that's the deal with gluten-free and dairy-free foods, and why we hear about it so much with individuals on the autism spectrum. Trying to think of what else we wanted to talk about. I think we said fats. We want to talk about fats. So there's a statistic that says that only 88% of the entire population is metabolically healthy. I'm sorry, only 12. 88% is not. 88% of us are not metabolically healthy. And that could manifest in 100 different ways, right? But it could be diabetes or insulin resistance or carrying extra weight or hormone imbalances. But the idea that we could just medicate our way out of that can be a slippery slope, right? Then you're really going down the rabbit hole, and then you're taking something else to deal with the side effects of that thing, and they can kind of start to pile on. And they may or may not really be benefiting our health or solving the root issue that's bugging us. So I don't prescribe meds, nor do I tell people they should get off their meds, but I certainly encounter a lot of people who have challenges with the side effects from their medication. I work remotely with a London health clinic, a mental health clinic that does a lot of diagnosis of autism. And if we think it's tough in this country, wow, in the United Kingdom, you could wait 18 months to get an appointment for a diagnosis. I mean, it's just unbelievable. I think we're headed in that direction, which is terrifying, but it's really rough. So a lot of individuals, as they move to adulthood, start working on, are there medications that can help? Some people do have success, and some people just kind of try medications. They may or may not work so well. They try something else, but they have to kind of build one up and slowly ease out of it, and then build up another one and slowly ease out of that. So it can be a long process. So when we work on diet in the background, it can be really, really transformative. So my approach really believes that every health issue, every single health issue you can think of, except maybe an accident, but there's even an argument that recovery from an accident is that all disease is sitting at the confluence of genetics and environment, and that we can't really control much of this, but we can really control our environment. And when we control our environment, we can influence whether the genetics get fully expressed, or if we can tamp some of them down, some of the unwanted gene variations down. So that's kind of the thing that's in our control. And that's what we work on, is what types of genetic variations do a lot of people on the spectrum have? A lot of them have compromises with methylation. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about what methylation is, but it's the processes in your body that read and utilize your DNA. So if that's kind of cut short and compromised, that can result in a whole lot of challenges. But sometimes finding the right B vitamin complex can be transformational, or finding the right fish oil, or maybe it's a probiotic. Maybe it's zinc deficiency. So we look at what are the things that can really make a difference for this individual, knowing that there's some commonalities among people on the autism spectrum, and then we're all individuals, so everybody needs a kind of a customized plan. So it's that combination of a general approach and framework customized for each person. I was going to get back to fats and metabolic health. So in an ideal world, we'd all be able to eat like bears, meaning we'd be able to go through periods of almost hibernation, right? We'd again, going back to cavewoman Sarah, she didn't have constant food supply at her fingertips. So she probably went long periods without eating and then feasted at times. She was probably looking out of the cave and saying, I think I'll go get something to eat. And then thinking, that is so much darn work, I'm just going to nap. So there were probably long periods of not eating. And oh my gosh, we just don't have that. We don't have that in our society at all. If a kid is going to soccer practice, it's like, well, some mom better bring the snacks because it's going to be 45 minutes. And now how are they going to survive without that, right? So The idea that we need to eat so regularly probably came from all the field work people did, right? If you were going out to work in the fields, you needed a really big breakfast, a really big midday meal, which was dinner, and then something at night, but less because you were going to bed. And we just kind of latched onto this, even though we're a much more sedentary society sitting in front of our terminals all day. I'm in a class this coming week for 8 hours on Friday and Saturday, and I'm just like, oh, that's going to be rough. But we've become so sedentary that we actually had to create the idea of exercise, right? Exercise is a construct to fight against what technology has made us into, really. So how do we have to adjust what we take in based on how much our lifestyle has changed? We're eating, like I said, really frequently. It's really hard on our bodies. So ideally, we'd be able to eat a meal and use the nutrients from it, or not eat a meal and use up our fat stores and some of our stored nutrients. We suck at that second thing now because we don't know how to do it. We never give ourselves a break to do that. And so that metabolic flexibility of being able to eat, being able to run off of the glucose from the food we eat or the fat of our own fat stores, we totally lost it. If we could do that, we wouldn't have the feelings of those sugar crashes. Sometimes people have those highs from eating sugar and then they kind of crash and have the low energy. And then we're looking for another carbohydrate, another simple, quick thing that's going to go through our system quickly and give us another sugar hit. So being able to eat more fats and more proteins and kind of crowding out some of the carbs and living on that for more hours of the day can really help brain power, brain function, cognitive ability, all kinds of things, digestion, blood sugar regulation. So bringing mindfulness to that can also be a really big thing. And the brain loves fats, loves fats, but it doesn't recognize certain fats, right? Like it doesn't recognize the oil that the French fries were fried in. So it's the avocados, it's the olive oil, it's also the animal fats, like good quality beef fat called tallow. Awesome. Body loves it. And we've kind of vilified fats over the last several decades. And we've really made enemies of meat products and animal products. And it's unfortunate when we look at the nutrient density by serving of different foods, the most nutrient dense food on the planet is actually organ meats like beef liver and beef everything, beef heart, chicken livers. So when you watch an animal go in for the kill in the wild, like a lion, he'll go for those visceral organs because that's where the most nutrients are. The next one, we like to call them organs of the sea. The next one would be oysters and clams and mussels, super, super full of nutrients, considering the serving size. The next one would be animal muscle meat, and then animal products like cheese and eggs. And then we get into fruits and vegetables, and then we get into legumes, and then herbs. And the very, very bottom of the list is grains. Such a bummer. So it's not that grains are the devil, but man, we have just really blown it by allowing them to take up such a huge space in our diet, right? So for some people, it means the only way I can recover from the assault of some of the foods I've eaten is to give them up for a little while or at least minimize them. And that's how we can see real functional cognitive improvement. So that was fats. I'm trying to think of the other one we were going to talk about. Oh, transition foods. Okay. So how do you possibly make any kind of dent or progress when you're in this mode of, I have my favored foods, I have my safe foods, something could make those foods unsafe in a minute, and then I'm almost left with nothing. And for some people on the spectrum, the hunger signal, the human hunger signal has been kind of tamped down. And so there's some people who would rather go without food if they can't figure out a safe food or can't get access to something that they have deemed as safe. They'd rather just go without anything. Some safe foods are considered to be so desirous, as we talked about before, that they're just consumed in an unending way. So either of those things have some level of dysfunction. I think we could agree. So, we look at things like, if you really like pancakes and you feel like pancakes are a comfy food, how can we alter the recipe of the pancake to beef up the nutrient density? It might be adding a scoop of protein powder to the recipe. It might be looking at completely different flours. It might be increasing the amount of egg in the recipe. So we look at different things like that to just, when we go back to that list of, what are the most nutrient dense and the least nutrient dense foods? How do we eat from more of the things towards the top and reduce the emphasis on the things towards the bottom? I think that's how I would say it. So that could apply to a lot of home recipes, and I see a lot of people who have challenges with the inconsistency, the lack of consistency in even just an apple, right? Things from nature don't always look exactly the same. This one might have a bruise, this one might be bigger, this one might be more ripe if it's a banana, or this orange might be smaller or bigger or more sour. And that can be very challenging. So I tend not to even worry about fruits and vegetables as much. If I can get people to eat more animal product, some animal flesh, for most people, ground meat, ground beef, because you can make it into a consistently sized and shaped patty, can be an awesome way to just transition into, okay, I can eat a burger. Maybe it doesn't need the bun on it, right? Skip the bun and go with the burger. That's a great transition too. Maybe there's some kind of cheese that would work that doesn't have to be just cow's cheese. Can we introduce other things that might be enticing? And I get that for some people, all of this sounds crazy, right? Like there's no way I can deviate. I can't give even this much to change the diet. And I think, there was a post in our group a few weeks back where someone used the phrase weaponizing food. And I couldn't have been more grateful for that comment, because it really gave me even further insight into what the experience is of someone who's autistic, that deviating and even talking about tampering with my safe foods feels like you're out to get me. And I'd love to get some feedback about the idea around, what if we thought of food as medicine? What if we changed, this would be a society-wide thing, right? How could we change our viewpoint of food, where we could say, I need to take this to kind of get me over the hump and help, and there's good stuff on the other side of that. There's feeling better, there's less selectivity of foods on the other side. And I don't know what the answer is there, right? I have a million tools up my sleeve to work with people, and each person is different. And sometimes we have success, sometimes we have a little less success. We move people along on their journey, and some level of change is possible for everybody, some level of improvement. A lot of little kids on the spectrum deal with terrible constipation, and they're in this cycle of just constant X-lax, which is not great for the muscles of of the colon. So it's not a permanent solution, right? So working on diet and again, those nutrient deficiencies can really be beneficial. And with younger kids, I mean, it's really the same for younger kids, teens, adults. How do we make it more palatable to make some level of change? So with that, I'd love to open things up to a further discussion of that topic or any questions people might have or anything.